Okay, so our more complicated side is the right-hand side, so I'm going to change everything to sines and cosines. So I'm going to sine theta, cosine theta, all over 1 minus sine squared theta over cosine squared theta. Since I have a denominator in both of these, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by the common denominator, which is cosine squared theta over cosine squared theta. So this is now sine theta over cosine theta times cosine squared theta all over, I'm going to distribute, I'll just rewrite it as 1 minus sine squared theta over cosine squared theta times cosine squared theta. So one of these cosines cancels, so that cancels with that. So I have sine theta cosine theta, and then this I distribute, I get cosine squared theta. And notice when I distribute to this second term, these cosine squareds cancel, and I just get I just get sine squared theta. Okay, so it looks like we'll change all these in sines and cosines. So it's sine theta over cosine theta minus cosine theta over sine theta all over sine theta over cosine theta minus cosine theta over sine theta. Looks like that's a plus 1. So probably the easiest way to manage this one is to multiply this whole fraction by the common denominator, which is cosine sine. So I'm going to multiply this by cosine theta sine theta, and this by cosine theta sine theta. So I'm going to multiply, oops, forgot the black, this first term and this second term by cosine theta sine theta. So notice I get cosine theta sine theta times sine theta over cosine theta minus cosine theta sine theta cosine theta over sine theta all over, this is a plus 1 over here. So this is cosine theta sine theta times sine theta over cosine theta plus cosine theta sine theta times cosine theta over sine theta. So we have a lot of canceling here. So the numerator, I'm left with sine squared theta minus cosine squared theta all over sine squared plus cosine squared plus 1. So I'm going to go over here now. My numerator over here, this is just equal to 1. That's equal to 1. So I have sine squared theta minus cosine squared theta all over 1 plus 1. So this is sine squared theta, and this right here is just equal to sine squared, because 1 minus cosine squared is sine squared, so that's plus sine squared. Sine squared plus sine squared is 2 sine squared, and I'm all done. So here's we're working on the left-hand side, let's just cut to the chase. 1 over cosine theta plus sine theta over cosine theta all over cosine theta over sine theta plus cosine theta. I think the easiest way is to multiply by a common denominator. So the common denominator of this whole thing is cosine and sine. So I'm going to multiply the top by cosine sine and the denominator by cosine sine. So this times this is cosine theta sine theta times 1 over cosine theta plus cosine theta sine theta times sine theta over cosine theta all over cosine theta sine theta times cosine theta over sine theta plus cosine theta sine theta times cosine theta. So this cancels with this cancels with this, This cancels with this, and there's nothing happening here. So here I'm just left with sine theta plus sine squared theta all over cosine squared theta plus sine theta cosine squared theta. So of numerator, I'm going to take out a common. Notice that this is being multiplied, so therefore I want to introduce a multiplication here. So by doing that, I can factor out a sine and a cosine squared in the denominator. So sine theta is 1 plus sine theta, and take out a cosine squared theta, I get 1 plus sine theta. So those two cancel. So let's just make a little note here. Note, sine theta is, tan theta is sine over cosine, and secant is 1 over cosine. And if I multiply those, I get sine theta over cosine squared theta, which is the same thing I have here. So let's just rewrite it as sine theta over cosine squared theta, which is the same as sine theta over cosine theta times 1 over cosine theta. This is tan theta, this is secant theta, and I'm all set. So, and we erase this so nobody will know that I cheated. Okay, so since there's nothing on the right hand side, we clearly have to work on the left hand side. So secant is 1 over cosine theta minus cosine theta minus sine theta times sine theta over cosine theta. I'm just going to multiply this, so I get 1 minus cosine theta minus cosine theta minus sine squared theta over cosine theta. I'm going to need a common denominator, so I'm going to multiply this middle term by cos over cos. So I now have 1 minus cosine squared theta minus sine squared theta all over cosine theta. I'm going to take a negative out of this numerator because hopefully you recognize that this right here is the same thing as sine squared plus cosine squared with a negative there. So I'm going to take out a negative, so that's cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta all over cosine theta. So this is 1 minus 1 over cosine theta, which is clearly equal to 0. Okay, so the easiest way is to change this into sines and cosines. So this is 1 over cosine squared theta minus sine squared theta over cosine squared theta plus sine theta over cosine theta all over 1 over cosine theta. So I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by the common denominator of the numerator and denominator. So I'm going to multiply this one by cosine squared theta and this one by cosine squared theta. So when I multiply this by this guy over here, I get 1 minus sine squared theta plus sine theta. One of these cosines cancels out, so I get cosine theta all over cosine theta. That's equal to cosine squared theta. So this is cosine squared theta plus sine theta cosine theta all over cosine theta. I'm going to take out a common factor of cosine. So cosine theta is cosine theta plus sine theta all over cosine theta. Those two cancel. I get cosine theta plus sine theta.